In this video, I'll demonstrate the various settings available when you want to print a worksheet. And those settings are typically specific to a sheet. So in other words, sheet 1 can have different print settings than sheet 2, which can have different print settings than sheet 3. Now before we run to the print settings, I want to take a look at some different views we have for our worksheets. Right now I'm in the normal view. There's a button down here in the bottom right for when I hold my cursor over it, it says normal in the tooltip. There's a page layout view and a page break preview view. These are also available if I run up here to view on the tab. Here's my normal view, page break preview, and page layout. So let me go to the page layout view. What this provides, there's a ruler up here so I can kind of align things if I want based on a ruler. There's also a ruler to the side. It gives me the opportunity to change the margins using this double-headed arrow. And it also gives me access to the headers and the footer, or header and the footer of the document. So if I want to add a footer, such as page numbers, I can just click in this center part. And when you click in there, either the header or the footer, it's going to open up a new context-sensitive ribbon, header and footer. And if I click on the design under that ribbon, or the design ribbon, I have a bunch of buttons here that allows me to put various things in the footer. And typically these are what you want to use to add information to a footer. So for instance, page number. I'll click on that and it puts ampersand page, and that's a code basically. So if I go click out of there, it's going to replace that with the actual page number. So page 1 in that case, if I scroll down, it'll be page 2. But it can tend to freak people out when they're seeing ampersand page. Why do I want that? Well, that's just the code to put in the page number. If I want to see 1 of 22, I can type the word of, but then hit this number of pages. So now I have 1 of 22 because that's how many pages are in this document. The other buttons up here that are used quite frequently are, for instance, a file name. If I need to later, if this is a printed document, want to know what was this file called, or file path. So that will give me the path and the file name, so I not only know what it's called, but where is it stored. Another very common one is possibly the sheet name, which again, ampersand tab. And that is going to, so it says tab, but really what it's going to put in is the name of the sheet each time. So again, that's the better way to do it, because if you type sheet 1 here and then later rename your sheet, well, that's still going to say sheet 1 and you'll have a disconnect. So always use these buttons for putting that kind of information in either the header or the footer. All right, let's go over and take a look at page break preview. I'll click on that. Oh, I got to get out of the footer first. Now I'll click on it. And what we're seeing are blue lines, and basically they represent where the pages are going to break. Our data happens to fit in one page wide, but obviously it's very long, so it's multiple pages down. And we're in portrait mode, meaning the paper has a vertical orientation. And this dotted line, dotted blue line, represents where the page would break unless we want to tweak that. So for instance, if for whatever reason I want all the Alexanders on a single page, I can grab that blue line and move it down and add that additional row. But realize what that's doing is it's going to shrink the font a little bit because I've asked it to add additional information to a page. And so in a little while I'll talk about the scale of printing, and by moving that down we've tweaked that scale a little bit. If you change your mind on one of those changes, up here on page layout ribbon, here in the page setup, there's a breaks button, and right here is reset all page breaks. So you go, oh, I can't remember what it was, but let's just go back to the normal settings. I can reset them and then I get that dotted line. Also under here is insert page breaks, and what it does is where whatever cell is the active cell, so this cell right here, it's going to put a page break above it and to the left of it. So when I click here and say insert page break, that puts a cell above and to the left. So now, in other words, name and address are going to show up on one page, and on the next page we're going to have city, state, zip. So what was fitting on one page, for whatever reason, I put on 2. So I decided, oops, I really don't want to do that. Let's reset all the page breaks, and here we go again. So that's page break preview. Let's go back to normal view and we'll take a look at these buttons here in their page setup and the width, height, and scale on the scale to fit group right here. Also notice that little button in the corner. In each case, what that does is open up the page setup dialog box. So each of these buttons has a setting associated with it, and that same setting can be accessed from this page setup dialog box. So a lot of times I will instantly just come here and make the changes I want to make, or you can do it with these buttons on the ribbon. So I'll open up the page setup dialog box. Let's take a look at it. The first tab, there's 4 tabs, is page. Obviously you can set the paper orientation to landscape or portrait, a vertical or a horizontal kind of orientation. Now here's that scaling we were talking about. These settings right here are also available right here on this scale to fit, and actually they're kind of nice to use up here. And basically I have 2 choices. I can adjust the font. I can shrink it down, say, to 90%, and then rather than this being 22 pages, it maybe will fit on something less than that. Or I can tell it, I need this to fit 1 page wide by, let's say, 15 pages tall. And when you hit OK on here, notice, we'll see it right here, notice the scaling went to 70%. Says, all right, if you want to make this fit on 15 pages, I'm going to have to shrink the font to a scale to 70%. And then when you go to print it, it may or may not be readable because the font gets so teeny. So what you may want to do on there is set this up. So notice when I clicked on more pages, it came back. I may want to go up here and say, oh, let's just leave it alone and leave the font at 100%. So when I hit OK, now we are at, I don't know if it's going to tell me. Maybe if I go to, it's 22 pages by going to page layout. I can see that. But our scale is back at 100%. So when you mess with the width and the height, it accomplishes what you want by adjusting that scale. All right, back into the page setup dialog box. We also have this margins tab, and obviously you can set the margins here. The center on page is interesting and sometimes useful. So if I run over to this sheet right here, I don't have that much data. So when I go to print preview, let's go to here and I hit print preview, my data is all to the top left of the page. And maybe that's fine, but you may want to center it on the page also. So let me scroll or go back to my page setup dialog box, margins. Right here is how I can center that data onto the page, both horizontally going this way and vertically up and down. So you may just want one of them or you may want both of them. And now when you go to print preview, your data is in the center of the page rather than in the top left. Another way to get back to page setup is while I'm in print preview, there's a page setup link right here. I can click on that and here are 4 tabs again. So we were just looking at margins, center, horizontally, and vertically. Header and footer. So remember on page layout, we could add a header and footer in that view. We can also do it right here. So I can go to custom footer, and again, I have the same buttons. So if I want to add page of pages, I can do that. If I want to put the file path, it's that link. If I want to put the sheet name, it's that link. And when I hit OK, I can see the information down here. Now notice the path is quite long, and so it overwrites the page numbers, which is something to consider when you use the path and file name. If it's going to be very long, you'll have to consider that. Anyway, moving on, let's go to, so that's the header footer, and finally the last one's the sheet. There's some interesting things on here. There's something called print area, rows to repeat at the top and columns to repeat at the left. So let's take a look at those. I'm going to get out of page setup and let's go take a look at a particular sheet. So I'll hit this back button and then I'll go to sheet 3. Now sheet 3 has a lot of data both vertically and then columns of data horizontally to the right. So it goes all the way to column Z. Okay, so if I go to page break preview, you can see I got page 1, and then going down it goes page 2, 3, and then it starts over coming back up to the top again, page 4, 5, 6 going down, here's 7. Anyway, several pages of information. Now here's the problem. Let's assume that data in column A is kind of relevant, and when I get to page 4, I have no idea what this information pertains to, right? I would like to know what this NPI is for this information on page 4. So what I want what to happen is that column to repeat on every page. And the same thing could be said for these column headings. So here are the column headings. When I scroll down to page 2, I don't have them anymore. So now when I print this page, I'm like, oh man, what was in this column? What's in this column? So I want those column headings to repeat. So going back to normal view, let's go to page setup, sheet. Rows to repeat at the top. What I can do is say I want row 1 to repeat on every page, and the columns to repeat at the left, I can click and say I want column A to repeat on every page. So now when I go to print preview, that's kind of hard to see because it's so small. Maybe I'd be better served by going to the page break preview or page layout. Yeah, so now when I go to page layout, you can see this a little better. Here's column A with the MPIs, and it's on this page. When I move over here to what would be page 4, I see the MPIs, and when I move over here to page 7, I see the MPIs. So now that number is associated with each record all the way across the pages. And the same thing will happen when I scroll down. So on page 2 down here, here are the column headings. On page 3, here are the column headings. So those headings, both the column and the row headings, or the MPI number, is being repeated on every page. The other setting that was available under page setup that's kind of useful is set the print area. So I have a sheet with all of this data, and I may decide that I only need to print through the zip code for whatever reason, right? I don't need the rest of that information. It's not that important. I just need to print that little bit right there. So I can set that print area. Of course, there's a button right here that would be set print area, or I can run over here to the sheet print area and now drag through that same area. So either way will accomplish the same thing. It sets that print area. Now, because I have such a small print area, I may not need the rows to repeat or the columns to repeat. It's hard to say at this point how big of an area I've done. But that's what setting print area does. So now when I hit print preview, it looks like I do still have 2 pages at least. So there are both pages, but it's not 22 or whatever it was before. All right, we're almost done. We'll just take a look at a couple more settings under page setup, and that's on that same sheet tab. Do you want the grid lines to print or not? You can choose that. Do you want the row and column headings, the A, B, C, and the 1, 2, 3s? Typically not, but for some reason you might. When there are comments in a cell, do you want to print those on the page? You can decide, or to print the errors. And finally, do you want your page numbers to go 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6 like we currently have? Or do you want it to be 1, 2, 3 to the right, and then 4, 5, 6 the next row down? So you can change that setting right there. As a general rule of thumb, if you're creating a spreadsheet for somebody else, you want to go in and set up the print settings so that the person who uses your worksheet can just hit print and have it print in a reasonable fashion, in a way that would be most meaningful. So you don't want the users of your spreadsheet to have to go in and mess with all of these settings.